Good evening, everyone. I'm Al, New York City divorce lawyer.
And I'm Ari. I'm a New York City writer and journalist.
This is the Nonlinear Love podcast where relationships, self-help sermons make us nauseous, and so instead we're going to tell actual stories of love, dating, romance, breakups, and divorce. We have with us Laurie Woolever. She's a writer, an editor, former assistant to Anthony Bourdain, author of the New York Times bestselling book Bourdain, the Definitive Oral Biography. And her new book, a memoir, is Care and Feeding. It's a page-turning wild ride from start to finish. Hi, Laurie.
Hi. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. So getting right into it, Care and Feeding. Why did you write this book?
This is a book that I think I've been writing in my head in one form or another for a very long time. I've really been telling myself the story of myself since I can remember, like truly since I was a little kid, always kind of trying to remember the details and how would I tell this story if I was retelling it. My work life really kind of is the bookend of the beginning and end of this book. And so I knew that I had a lot of stories that started with my working life in New York after college. And so there's always been this idea of, I'm going to tell these stories. This is worth telling. Was it going to be autofictional or a series of essays or memoir? I didn't really know. I just thought I'm going to tell. And I've been telling these stories in some form or another for a long time. So now memoir seemed like the right fit for any number of reasons. And after doing Bourdain, the Definitive Oral Biography, and doing World Travel, which is the book that I started writing with Tony Bourdain before he died, I thought, now I'm going to tell this story that has Bourdain in it, that has a lot of other people in it, but is actually my story.
Can I ask, as a fellow writer, how you decided on memoir versus autofiction? Because I think not a lot of people know what autofiction is. It's autobiographical fiction. But I'm curious how you came to that decision.
I didn't ever really go too far down the road of considering fiction or autofiction, only because I think, God, writing fiction is such a skill, such a specific thing. I don't have a lot of experience in it, and there's a million novelists out there. It's at some point it became a little bit of a market question.
Right.
What can I get a good advance on? What's going to sell? And why fictionalize it when I think the stories that I have to tell are, that kind of stand on their own. And I was also told by my agent that collections of essays are hard for agents to sell, and the advances are very small. So honestly, it was like, I want to get paid. I'm going to tell this story.
Totally.
How can I get paid? But also, I think the memoir genre really, really suits me and suits the story that I have to tell and the way that I've told it.
What was the experience of writing the book? Was it happy, sad, all over the place?
Yeah, I'd say it was all over the place. A friend asked me this morning, that she said, somebody I know has a feelings wheel on their refrigerator, and what are your feelings today? And I was like, oh God, and I thought that's a really good. Actually, after I sort of got over my initial ick, it was like that's a good way to think about it. So my feelings wheel for this book really depended on the day. There's a lot of funny stuff in there. I was very happy to have the opportunity to write the book, to find a publisher that was willing to take a chance on it. So there's a lot of joy in the process. There's a lot of sad stories within the book, and a lot of mortifying, actions that I took and decisions that I made and consequences. So it was a really mixed bag. It was very. I don't think I realized how exhausting it was until I was done, emotionally exhausting.
Is there a particular audience that you want to read this book?
I'd like as wide an audience as possible. Obviously, every person with books to sell will say that, but I think that it does have a wide appeal to anyone who's sort of chased a dream that was difficult to get. In my case, in this book, it was trying to be a writer. People who have worked in restaurants or just love restaurants and love restaurant culture and food culture, people who love travel anyone who's struggled with marriage and doubts and infidelity, addiction, parenting and doubts about that. I mean, there's a lot of, it's my specific story, but there are a lot of broad themes. So, you know, I was told that it's probably going to appeal more to women than men, and I sort of bristle at that a little bit, because I think in some times and in some ways I tried to move like a man in the world, and
men should read it. It's
men
fantastic.
should read it. Thank you.
It's so
Yes.
fun.
I was going to say, as you were describing the target audience, I'm like, that's everybody. Like what
Well,
you described is like most people have had those experiences,
Yeah.
because it is travel, food, relationships. I mean, that's sort of like at the center of life.
Right, yeah. So I think it's broadly relatable. And if you're interested in Tony Bourdain and or Mario Batali, I mean, there are stories in there, but it's not a book about Tony. It's not a book about Mario. It's my story and how my life intersected with those two very big personalities at different times.
Yeah. So let's get into your career. What led you to want to go to the French Culinary Institute?
Sure. So I was working as a private cook for a family in Manhattan, and I didn't really have any skills. That was fine with them. They wanted very, very simple, fat-free food. And I did that for a while. I was really happy to have that job. And at some point, it started to not really feel like enough. I really wanted to learn how to cook for real. And I was looking through a copy of New York Magazine, and there was a story about what it really is like to be a chef or a cook. But the only thing that stuck out to me was you could make up to $85,000 a year. This was in 1998, right? So that seemed like a lot of money to me, and a lot more than I was making at the time. And I didn't give it a whole lot more thought than that. I said, I want to go to cooking school. You know, I'm going to learn to cook, and I'm going to make, you know, more than twice what I'm making now. And I think that I was protecting myself probably. If I had really done the research and really dug into what it looked like to be fresh out of culinary school and what the money looked like, I probably would have gotten scared and not done it. But I did it. I chose French culinary because it was in Manhattan where I lived, and because it was a 6-month program versus the Culinary Institute of America is a much more intensive 2.5-3-year program. And I'd already been to college. I didn't want to go do that again. So it was, I liked the quick in and out, and I liked the fact that I could walk there. And I did it sort of blindly.
You said your dream was to be a writer. Do you describe yourself as a food writer?
I have for many years made a living, or made half a living, or part of a living as a food writer.
What is that exactly?
That is, I mean, there's no legal definition, but I think it's someone whose primary subject is food, whether that's cooking or ingredients or, you know, any of, I mean, food, right? It's a huge topic. In my case, it meant that I've worked on cookbooks, helping chefs and co-authors to bring their cookbooks to fruition. I've written feature stories about food. I've done a lot of interviews with chefs. I was the editor at a magazine called Art Culinaire for a few years that was very focused on chefs and their stories and their recipes. So that's what a food writer is.
Since your son and my son are both 16, would you recommend that they go into the restaurant business?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
That's why I'm asking.
I think
I've already sent my son into it. He's a food runner.
Okay. I think it is a great first job for a young person. I think it really teaches you a lot of things, and it's really it can be really fun. And you learn the value of hard work, and you learn about systems and working together. I was a bus girl. That was my first job ever at the age of 14 in the family restaurant in my town. I think that there is, if you really love it and you get something out of it and you're fulfilled by it, to make it a career, why not? I think you have to understand that you're never going to get rich. It's the goal should not be to be on television or to be on the cover of a magazine, but it's if you're working in restaurants because you love that work. I think, sure. You know.
My first job was a hostess at a Tex-Mex restaurant, and I feel like I just learned so much about the world.
Yes.
Like I interacted with so many people, and I was still in high school at that point, but I was so much more interested in my work at the restaurant than anything in high school because it just felt so real. And it was very chaotic, and there was a rampant sexual harassment, and like, of course. But it was like, I loved it because I felt very like it was meaningful, and you were part of a team, and you were like working with the waiters and the bartenders, and it was just, and there was always something to be talking about because you're just like at the center of all of these people.
Yeah, if you love gossip, you'll love restaurants.
So on the subject of drinking, right, there's a lot in the book about alcohol consumption. And there's a quote in the book where you say, "It wasn't my choice to overeat and get shit-faced. It was my job." What job was that?
That was early on when I was Mario Batali's assistant. And that scene that you're talking about, we went to Atlantic City. He was doing a cooking demonstration and giving out signed books and, you know, meeting people. And then afterward, we went up to the Italian restaurant on the top floor of the resort and had a amazing, gigantic, ridiculously over-the-top meal. Yeah, and I wanted just to get a salad. I wasn't really hungry. I didn't really understand the way that Mario moved in the world. So I was just like, oh, I'm just going to get a salad and maybe go watch some TV. And it's like, no, we're going to eat everything. We're going to drink everything. Then we're going to go to a strip club, and then we're going to gamble. I was like, okay.
How old were you?
I was 24.
24, okay.
Yeah. So not a baby, but
still,
pretty
like, young in your
new
career.
to adulthood.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into your love life. So you started the book describing what you wanted or didn't want in relationships like this. Bob was an aspiring playwright, perfect on paper, and I knew that he would respect me for whatever, but I just didn't want to be gently courted by a sensitive, family-oriented cartoon giraffe. That's such a great phrase.
Poor Bob.
But can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah, he was, this guy, Bob, was really nice. And I think I didn't want that. I wanted, you know, I knew nice boys in high school. I knew nice boys in college, and I wasn't, and I was, I think I presented and was a nice girl, and that wasn't interesting to me at that age. And looking around this restaurant full of potential hookups or, you know, boyfriends or whatever, and there were a lot of people that I knew weren't very nice, and they were just chemically, inherently much more interesting to me. And I thought, I'm really gonna, if I settle in with this guy, I'm gonna miss out on a lot of really interesting, fun experiences.
I know that feeling.
Is that like the signpost of the family-oriented cartoon giraffe being nice?
I guess so. Yeah, I don't know why I called him that. He just seemed so, yeah, it was, you know, the ick was not a thing that people said back then, but I think there was just something about him. You know, there had been boys in high school that the same thing. It's like, I know I'm supposed to want to go out with him because he's so nice, but I can't. I'm not taking my clothes off with this guy, you know, and that was just, it was like a chemistry thing. So, yeah.
Do you think there's a shortage of the cartoon giraffes today, or?
I don't know. I mean, I'm in a 3.5-year relationship now with someone who is very nice. And when I first met him, I was like, I don't know, this guy seems really nice, you know, and nice being whatever. I was right back in that teenage thing of being like, he doesn't seem like he's going to really like give me a lot of drama, you know. And fortunately, I was just mature enough to go, well, let's give it a try, you know. So I don't know. I think they're out there, but I've been off the market for a long time. So it seems like all I hear from women that are dating, especially on the apps, is that it's, you know, it's terrible. It's a bloodbath. Everyone's a monster. Everyone's a psychopath. That can't be true. I know it's not true. But
I don't think it's true. I think there are different like variations of the types of men that you can find, and I think the apps like commodify it, you know, or gamify it. But yeah, so speaking of nice, you write in the book that eventually you wanted someone to be nice to me, for things to be quiet and calm, to be treated well, and to treat myself well, which was something I couldn't even conceive of. What was that shift in, you know, wanting that excitement and then deciding that you wanted something nice, but still, you know, you used to have that back and forth in your mind? Yeah, it's... So I did go out with the not nice guys, and I did have a lot of adventures and experiences in my 3.5, almost 4 years working for Mario. There's just no shortage of
people to hook up with and fool around with, and one night stands, and I got my fill of it, and I think by the end of it I was tired. I felt like I can't, I've kind of moved my way through this dating pool, and it's starting to feel a little gross, and maybe I'm ready for something nice, and maybe I'm ready to settle down at that. I think by the time I left I was 28, and so that seemed like maybe this is the right time to meet somebody nice, which I did.
I'm trying to, especially as a divorce lawyer, you often question why people stick it out in relationships that objectively seem to be miserable, right? So you write in the book as to one relationship, after breaking up and the specter of going back on the market or being alone forever seemed worse than staying unhappily together.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a perspective that's unique to women, or do you think it's shared by men?
I don't know. I can't imagine that it's unique to women. I think that there's got to be a comfort that doesn't really have anything to do with gender, around being, it's the devil, right? And it does seem from my observations that men have an easier time getting back out on the market, and maybe what men are looking for. I don't know. I mean, it's far be it for me to generalize about men and women too broadly, but I do think that maybe men are happy, or can be, it's more comfortable just to date casually after a divorce or after a big breakup, and maybe women struggle a little more. Although I will say, I've been in all of these positions, but at that time when I was thinking about, do I want to get married or do I want to stay married? Yeah, it seemed terrifying to go back out and into the unknown, and that's unique to me. Well, I don't know. I'm sure it's not unique to me, but I just felt like no one will ever want me, and the idea of being alone also seemed really awful. It still, I have to be honest, it still does. And I'm
Being
very
single?
happy. Being
Or-
single, yeah. I'm very happy in my relationship. I'm not going anywhere. But I don't, I don't want to be. I've never wanted to be single my whole
funny,
life.
Alan and I talked about this one podcast, and so I've never really been single. And he was like, do you think maybe you could be single for a period of time? And I was like, it's not that I have to be, it's not that I don't think I can be alone or by myself. It's more so that life is more interesting and pleasurable when you do have someone that you're exploring things with, or even a friend, or like my cat, or I know it's not the same thing, but it's still, yeah. Do you think it's were you always just drawn to that connection and that romance and that companionship in various forms, or?
Yeah, well, I definitely was single, and I was miserable when I was single.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
I think, the way that you're describing it sounds really nice and positive, and like, I'm seeking out pleasure. I think for me it was like, if I'm coupled up, then I'm not worried about dying alone. It was more like, let's negate the negative, then let's head toward the positive. I feel like the culture that I was raised in, which is just, the United States in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, was that your value as a woman was really dependent on being in a relationship or having somebody be interested in you. Do you have a boyfriend? That to me was, and I often, most of the time, didn't. I did well in school, and I was well-rounded. I went to a good college and all that stuff, but I always felt like without a boyfriend, I'm a little less valuable in the world, or a lot less valuable in the world.
And even if you have a strong backbone, if you hear that over and over from society, like, and it could just be a very innocuous, like, oh, are you engaged? And you're just like, well, no. But enough of those comments, and it starts to make you question, like the death by 1,000 paper cuts.
So you also wrote in the book, this is how I saw the future. Several decades of work, and then the disgusting and expensive and boring and awful breakdown of the human body, made only marginally more bearable by having someone to witness your suffering. How do you get to seeing the future that way?
Yeah, it's dark. I don't know. I think there's part of it that is, so my mother had multiple sclerosis diagnosis when she was 19 years old, shortly after she and my dad started dating as college students. And I think I wasn't aware of it at the time, but even now, it's only now after she's died that I think I understand that really had a profound impact on the way that I looked at relationships. That my parents, my dad was all in, didn't matter that, he knew that life was going to be tough for her and that she was going to need a lot of caretaking. But this was their story. This was their trajectory of, they had a lot of happy years together and a lot of physically okay years. And then as time went on, it was more and more caretaking, which is, if you're at all familiar with caretaking of an aging body, especially one that's got multiple sclerosis or any kind of degenerative neurological condition, it's really grueling and miserable. And you can snipe at each other, and it's just thankless. And so this was I guess I just thought this was what marriage was. And the idea of being alone through that seemed, and I don't have a diagnosis. I'm very healthy, God forbid, I hopefully I will never, but this was, I think, subconsciously just how I expected life to be. I didn't have a lot of imagination for
You remember that
way.
Growing up, seeing that as a kid?
Yeah, well, my mom was physically okay for a long, long time, but I knew she had multiple sclerosis. She was, she didn't talk about it a lot, but we knew, and we knew that at some point she would not be able to walk, and we knew that life was going to change for her. So there was just this kind of specter of it always hanging over. And seeing, older relatives, my parents went through a lot of caretaking of the people that were of the previous, my various grandparents and great aunts and uncles. I just saw a lot of decay, and it was much harder if somebody didn't have a spouse to take care of them.
I was going to say, I think that's a fear that a lot of people have, that should they get sick or their body break down, and you saw that firsthand with your parents, that no one will be there to take care of them, and then what will happen, and that's a really frightening thought.
Yeah. So between that and the single women that I knew, we were talking about my mindset in my late 20s, early to mid 30s. I knew of some older women that were older than me, women that were single, maybe 5, 10, 15 years older, and they would say, "Oh, I wish I could find a boyfriend." And I didn't really know what was going on in their minds, but I was like, that's a cautionary tale. I never want to be that. I don't want to be 40 and so sad that I didn't get married yet. I was filling in a lot of blanks with my own anxiety and insecurity.
So you wrote about how your ex would say to you lovingly, "You're my soulmate," just trying to be offhandedly sweet and romantic, and it made you want to claw off your own skin. Do you believe in soulmates, or what was it about that situation that made you so annoyed?
Yeah, I mean, this poor guy. I thought it was sort of silly. I don't think I believe in soulmates. No, I don't believe in soulmates. And I don't think he did either. I think he was just saying something to be sweet. And I could be sort of prickly around him, sort of like a stickler for precise language. And that was important to me, and it wasn't that important to him, and we came from different sort of educational backgrounds. Not that he's not very smart, but I was like, what do you mean soulmates? That's stupid. I was being a bitch. And I can see that now. But and then I also, I had doubts about, am I really happy in this relationship? And when somebody tells me that I'm their soulmate, well, I don't know, even if I did believe in soulmates, I'm not sure that you're mine, and that didn't feel good. It's like he was just trying to be sweet and nice, but it was triggering a lot of guilt and anxiety in me that, I was not into it.
Right.
I was rolling my eyes.
Had you ever dated someone who made you believe that the idea of soulmates could have existed, or you had a wild romance, or no?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think up until my ex-husband, I hadn't really had any mature relationships. There were high school boyfriends, and there were college flings, and there were these guys that I hooked up with as after culinary school, and none of them were really meaningful or mature. So I hadn't really had that opportunity. But even so now, I'm very, like I said, I'm very happy in my relationship.
Yeah.
I don't think either one of us would go, "You're my soulmate."
Right.
So there's a lot in the book about addiction. Were you an addict? Would you consider yourself to have been?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And it took me a long time to feel okay and comfortable and not like an imposter saying that, because my idea of an addict was somebody who was, killing somebody in a DWI or ODing or, really having a spectacular rock bottom moment. And, I was lucky that that was not my story, that I was able to kind of pull out of the nosedive before things got too serious. But yeah, I think I was using alcohol and marijuana addictively, and I was using sex and relationships addictively. And I think there are times where I have used food addictively. So,
Do you think the addiction bleeds from one thing to the next? In other words, you just said food, relationships.
it can. Yeah, I think it can, and I think it very often does for people, especially when they're just thinking about, well, I've got a drinking problem, so I'm going to stop drinking, and then suddenly they're smoking, 2 packs of cigarettes a day, or eating a full cake, or sexually acting out, or whatever it is. So everyone's experience is different. I can only speak to my own experience as an addict, but I quit drinking. I didn't quit smoking pot right away. But I had already been sexually acting out, but I think once I quit drinking, I continued to act out sexually, and I think I still was chasing that sense of oblivion and that high of transgression. So it really wasn't until I got serious about 12-step programs and understanding, all of that, that I was able to kind of take a step back and go, I don't need to do any of this. I want to, and it's been a coping mechanism for a long time, but I probably shouldn't be out sleeping around. I mean, there's a very common suggestion that's made to people that are just getting into recovery, where, you're really not supposed to date anyone for a year. If you're in a relationship, great. Basically, don't make any big changes. Don't break up with someone as soon as you get sober. And if you're single, stay single for a year. I never did that. I knew that I was supposed to, but I didn't. And I think it's because there's a real danger of transferring your addictive nature to another person, and that's not healthy for anyone.
Are you comfortable being out with someone at a bar or around someone that's drinking, or do you try to avoid that?
I don't try to avoid it now. I think at first it was really hard for me. I don't seek out bars. If I happen to be in a restaurant and meeting somebody at the bar, or we're sitting at the bar, that's fine, but I'm not putting myself in situations. Honestly, because now that I don't drink, I find people that are drunk can be really boring.
Right.
Not always, but it's like the drunker people get, the more it's like, all right, this is not for me.
Yeah.
But I don't mind if people have a drink around me. I don't tend to spend time with people who drink a lot.
Right.
So that makes it easy. If I had a close friend or a, boyfriend or family member that was a heavy drinker, I think that would be challenging.
Yeah. My boyfriend is sober for a little over a year, and he tells me that he's fine being around people who drink, but he said the same thing as you, that people get so repetitive and they just like say the same thing over and over, and they're just like drunker the next time they say it. And he's like, this is so unbearable.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm sure that's very eye-opening.
Yeah. And then also you go, God, that was me. I was that person. How boring I must have been.
So there's a passage in the book about a family trip to Cancun, and you say, after breakfast at the chaotic buffet, I took a taxi alone into the nearest town, went to a pharmacy, and bought over-the-counter boxes of Xanax and codeine, hoping maybe I could just keep myself in a state of pilled-out numbness all week in the absence of weed, which I did not bring and did not know how to procure. I snapped a Xanax bar and washed it down with a rum and Coke. When I woke up, I was already crying for no reason that I could articulate. After that, I stuck to codeine and little shots of vodka. What happened before that, like that incident or that? Do you remember?
I mean,
what
I
was
kind of
happening
get
in
it. Having raised young children at the buffet in the Caribbean, I get it, but not that. I wouldn't go that far. So.
Yeah, no, it was not great. I mean, so we were at an all-inclusive, which I had never done before, and I will never do again. It's great for some people. I couldn't stand it, but this was probably less than a month until I quit drinking. So I was just feeling really bad about myself. I was caught up in an affair that was really making me feel terrible. but I also thought it was making me feel great, even though those moments of pleasure were very few and far between at that point. It was very dependent on smoking pot every day, but didn't have that with me. So I was at a loss of how to emotionally regulate, how to check out in the way that I preferred. I was just having a really hard time. I was very uncomfortable with myself. I did not like the place that we were at. It was very expensive to go to these places, and it felt shabby. And I just felt like I had been sort of duped. I couldn't. I was very uncomfortable in my own skin.
Yeah.
Can you, if you're suffering from an addiction, do you think the addict can heal without owning up to the addiction? In other words, do you feel like the addict has to own up to it for there to be any chance of coming out of it?
I truly don't know. That was not what worked for me. There probably are people who will say, or maybe have had that experience, but I don't know enough about addiction and recovery in a broad sense. So
what
that
clicked
was not
for you?
Worked for me. What clicked for me? It was a long, slow click of going to 12-step meetings, not drinking, but continuing to smoke pot, continuing to act out. And I couldn't quite get over the hump. I couldn't figure out a way to stop smoking pot. I was like this last comfort, this last thing that I was very reluctant to give up. I thought I was treating my anxiety, but I was actually creating my anxiety with it. And then it was just a coincidence, although, people who believe in a higher power and all that will say, well, there really are no coincidences, and that was your higher power. But the truth is, I needed to get life insurance. I was going through the process of the divorce. I needed to get a life insurance policy, and I went to talk to somebody about it, and he said, do you smoke? And I said, well, I smoke pot. And he said, well, you've got to stop, or otherwise it's going to cost you like 3 times as much. Your monthly fee is going to be 3 times as much. It doesn't matter if you smoke pot or cigarettes or cigars or anything. It's all the same with the blood test. So you might want to consider maybe giving it up for a couple of weeks at least and get your blood test. And it's like I needed an outside reason, some compelling reason, and it was money. Thank God I didn't have enough money to be cavalier about the amount of money it would cost me to continue smoking. And so that's what it took. So once I stopped, for the blood test, I just never started again, because right away I was like, oh, okay, this feels good.
Is there any piece of you that feels like you could still regress? Like, do you feel as though you still need to be careful, or do you think, I got this, I'm never going back to that?
I think there's always the possibility. Life is long and there's temptation all around, but I feel pretty secure in my sobriety. But I also will say that I attend meetings regularly, and I do service work within the program, and, I talk to people, and, I think I have a decent set of tools in my toolkit. So never say never, but I'm not tempted. I'm not interested in drinking. I'm not interested in smoking pot. Because I see that for me, my life is a lot better, a lot happier and simpler and quieter. So
you write about the experience of birth and being a mom, shifting gears here.
A little different.
A little different. So the one post-surgery hour, blitzed on a morphine cocktail and swaddled in warm flannel blankets, was the hands-down best part of the birth experience. Do you think other moms disagree with you? Have you talked to other moms about I'm sure you have. Yeah.
Yeah. For sure. Some people I think do have a very lovely postpartum period and seem to be really happy, and
that was not my experience, and I wasn't even pregnant.
Right.
So I relate more to your experience.
Yeah, I think it's probably more common that people struggle. I mean, there's just so many things hitting you at once, the physical, the insane sleep deprivation, just the newness of it all, the fear, having to keep this little thing alive, and it can blow your life apart. So I think it's much more common. And those people that would be like, this is blissful, I love this. I'd always be like,
I can't.
oh, shut up.
I
Keep it to
can't.
yourself.
Those are the craziest people. You're like, what are you actually hiding?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can
And
say
maybe
that.
maybe they're doing drugs that we don't know about, or,
Yeah.
who knows. But I wish it was like that for everyone. It would be a lot easier, but it really gets your attention. You really know, you learn how difficult and serious this thing is. And you don't really want to tell people who haven't done it yet because you don't want to scare them off. But yeah, I really, really struggled. And I think that's an incredibly common experience.
Yeah.
On that subject, you write about how your overnights were a minefield of unpredictable wakings. I started taking shots of brown liquor anywhere from 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. to settle my nerves. I'm just giving you the floor here. Those first few months, all the sleep deprivation, does it get any worse?
Does it get worse after the first few months?
I just, in the whole spectrum of raising a child.
I think, for me, I think those first few months were hands down the worst, the absolute worst.
Amen.
Yeah, I think there are plenty of people who have, I've been very lucky. I have a kid who was like pretty easygoing after those first few months and was not like a monstrous toddler. And, he's had his ups and downs, but he's like a pretty chill kid. I'm sure there are people who have a very easy time of it, or relatively easy time of the early baby stuff, and then their kid develops behavioral issues or has a horrible accident. I mean, there's a million things that can go wrong that make you sort of nostalgic about the baby times. But by and large, with everything else, if everything else goes okay, I'd say those early baby months are the worst. Mm-hmm. But that's me.
So this is something that I actually just read, Motherload by Sarah Hoover. I don't know if you've heard of this book. Mm-hmm. It's about motherhood, and I feel like this quote from your book is in line with a lot of what she had to say. But you write, I'm just really bored with my life right now. Everything feels so predictable and small. I'd love for something interesting to happen and kind of push things off the track. I had a small handful of married women friends with whom I'd commiserate over feeling bored, frustrated, and guilty about a common desire to act out various fantasies with people other than our spouses. I feel like as women, there's this idea that maybe you're supposed to be excited and maternal, but then the reality sets in and it's so different for everyone.
Yeah, it can be really boring. The hours are long, especially if you're home with your kid and those early days and weeks and months and years. Babies are cute and wonderful and they give you a lot, but it is very boring. Or it can be, and you're really committed to staying close to home and taking care of their needs, and that's important and that's good. You're that the baby is primary. I absolutely get it. But if you're somebody who has had an interesting life moving around the world, making your own decisions about where and when to go, what to eat, and when to get up and when to go to bed, it's a real it sucks.
I was going to ask if maybe the contrast for you was even more extreme, given you had such an interest, like you have had such an interesting life, and like it's, it probably clipped your wings in a way.
Yeah, it clipped my wings, but I will say I think it's important for me to recognize that some of it was the fact that I was drinking and I was smoking pot, and I was still doing a little of that, or maybe not even a little of that in the postpartum period, but my concept of fun was so bound up in going out and drinking and having people over and getting rowdy with adults, and that's you have time and energy for a lot less of that when you have a baby, and maybe if you've got the kind of money where you can have nannies and whatnot, and then that's a different thing. That was not my experience. I was really like in it. I did take my child to daycare a couple days a week. I did have a break, but I was using those hours to work, so it wasn't quite the same thing. But yeah, and this was a fear I had even before I got pregnant. I wasn't ever sure that I wanted to be a mom, because even babysitting, I would be like, oh my God, when is this going to be over? This sucks. It's so boring, But then once I got married, you kind of get on that track and you're like, okay, well, I guess we're supposed to have a kid now.
Yeah.
I'm very glad that I did it, but it was not the most natural thing in the world for me.
When you see a stroller, do you cross the other side of the street?
No.
I do.
No, but I do scan.
You're really bringing it back here, Lori.
Well, I definitely
don't miss
scan
those days.
if I see like a young, husband and wife or young couple of any, makeup with a baby, I'm always like kind of just scanning to see like, do they look happy? Are they grumpy with each other? And also just like, oh, thank God that's not me anymore. Like I feel almost guilty, like walking down the street, just me, listening to a podcast. And
That's
like,
right.
Sorry about your stupid baby. Like,
I did that. It's done.
yeah.
So infidelity, you were, fantasizing with friends about finding other men, and but why do you think people cheat, and what was the cause in your relationship?
Why do people cheat? I mean, that's a huge
I
essay
know.
question.
It really is.
Well, I think there's any number of reasons. Boredom, I think, is probably number one, right? Or discontent within the relationship, but that thing we talked about before about the fear of leaving it. So, well, can I get some of my needs met outside of the relationship without destroying the relationship, which was a tack I tried to take for a while. Yeah, I mean, I think there are people that are sex addicts. There are people that probably never intended to be faithful when getting married or getting into a relationship. That wasn't necessarily me. I don't know. It's hard to remember where my head was at early in my marriage, but yeah, I think there's a compulsion for some people. I felt compelled, on and off throughout the course of my primary relationship. So, but boredom and looking for that validation, looking for that thing that teenage feeling, as Nico Case says. It's very, very compelling.
What do you think pushed you to act on it?
Probably a combination of boredom and looking for wanting to feel attractive again, wanting to feel, everyone loves the beginnings of things, right? The sort of the full potential of something without really knowing how it's going to end or that it might go badly. Just the happy, exciting beginning stuff is very intoxicating.
I've heard that there's an acronym for this which is kind of silly, but the polyamorous community calls it NRE, which is new relationship energy, and that it's like it's now like a phrase.
Huh. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that was primarily I talk a little bit too in the book about I was not very happy with my body and the way I felt about my body, and I had this sense that my ex-husband, then boyfriend, I thought, well, he thinks I'm perfect, and then I asked him one day, do you think I'm overweight? And he very honestly said yes. But I don't mind. And all I heard was the yes, I think you're overweight. And that, my ego was so fragile, my sense of self was so fragile that kind of caused me to cave in on myself and to no longer be interested in intimacy, because I felt like I have, I relied on this sense of my own attractiveness and beauty in order to feel comfortable enough to be intimate. And then once, I'm not blaming him. I mean, I think if he could change anything, he would take that back, and I never should have asked the question, but I did. I was drunk and I was, young. That really changed things for me. I really kind of closed up, and that was probably the beginning of the end. We weren't even married yet.
Wow.
So you wrote about your experiences with strangers. I became aware that whatever regrets I had, my experience with the old man in Tokyo had opened a nihilistic vortex in me, a kind of manic greed for consecutive nights of blackout drinking and hunger for the sense of triumph I felt in the immediate before and after a sexual transgression. Life is short, I'd say to myself. I want to be happy. I kept looking for something new that would help me disappear from myself. Why did you want to disappear from yourself?
I think I was just so, like I was saying before about being on that unhappy vacation in Cancun, I was just so uncomfortable in my own skin. I knew that I was, floundering in my marriage, that I was drinking more and more. I don't think I was, at that time after Tokyo, I don't know that I was quite there yet in understanding that I was an alcoholic, but I knew that I was very unhappy and depressed, and I was not on antidepressants, and I was drinking all the time. Alcohol is a depressant. I did not put those two things together, but I was just really unhappy, and really I felt guilty about the way I was behaving, and the way to sort of get rid of those feelings was to just annihilate myself with more alcohol or more drugs or more sex. I didn't like who I was, and I had no sense of how to do anything about it.
What was the experience like keeping that hidden for as long as you did?
Oh God, it was not great. I think there was a part of me, I will own up to the fact that some of it I thought was really exciting and glamorous and cool, that I was like having this double life, and that I had this secret, and there were certain friends that I could tell it to, and if something happened, I couldn't wait to go tell those one or two friends about this new thing. I wanted to be sort of entertaining to them and to myself. But I also felt guilty. I was raised Catholic, and as much as I've kind of moved away from that is like bone deep shit. You don't really, I did not get to escape from that deep, deep sense of guilt and shame that I was doing something wrong. So, it was really hard to keep the secret, and it's like the more I kept secrets, the more distant I became from my ex-husband, and it was this like self-perpetuating cycle of like, I'm gonna go hide in the bathroom and text, or I'm gonna whatever it is, go out, say I'm doing one thing but go out and do something else. It's just like you tell more lies, you feel more distant, you keep your distance so that you don't get caught in your own lies. I mean, it's not great, but at the time I thought, there was a part of me that definitely thought it was like, I'm really living,
Do you still subscribe to that life is short?
I do.
It is.
Yeah, I do think life is short, but I don't mean it in the way that I did then, which is like, I'm going to do everything I want all the time. Yes, we finish the wine, let's open the whiskey, let's, put the kids in front of a movie and go smoke pot in the bathroom. That's how I used to use it. Like, let's just do everything, because we might die tomorrow. Now it's like, life is short. Let me make sure that I'm, it's very, very, it feels very corny to say, but it's like, let me make sure my son knows I love him. Let me make sure my dad knows I love him. Let me do the work that I want to do. I mean, this book is a good example of that. Like, is a feeling, it's the one thing that's like, if I died before I wrote this book, or what I would feel, well, I wouldn't feel anything because I'd be dead, but it's if I got a terminal diagnosis and then I was no longer able to write this book, I think I would have felt quite regretful.
Did you have to redefine for yourself what the experiences of being alive like meant to you? Because you strike me as someone who really cares about experiences, and like, when boredom sets in, it's sort of like you feel stagnant, or like you have to go and do something. So I would imagine that feeling never really goes away, but then you're redirecting to other experiences that still give you a sense of interest, or even if those experiences are, as you said, giving to your son, but they're still interesting in a different type of way.
Yeah, I don't have that kind of restlessness anymore that I used to, where I would get bored easily, or I'd be afraid of getting bored, and so I'd be like, well, I better smoke pot before I walk to the post office, because otherwise it's going to be really boring. Now I think I've been able to find what's interesting in the most mundane stuff.
Yeah.
I read books in a way that I don't think I did for a long time. I definitely waste a lot of time on the internet, which is not great, but I do it. I don't go out a lot. I'm not dying to like run around. I do travel somewhat because my boyfriend doesn't always live in New York, but when I go to his house, we hang out, and he does his work and I do mine, and we read books, and maybe we'll watch a TV show, and we'll take the dog for a walk. And I don't think that would have been satisfying for me a decade ago. And now it's like, this is amazing. Look at us. We're reading books. This is so cool. And we'll talk about the books. So I don't think I'm somebody who is inherently like, I have to constantly be entertained. For me, I think it was more a function of like, I'm a jangling ball of nerves slash, puddle of depression. And so I need to constantly distract myself.
Right. So back to the point about hiding yourself when you were in your marriage. You say, and it was so easy keeping this thing hidden. We rarely spoke about anything deeper than groceries, laundry, the school bus, the cat, our upcoming visits to one side of the family or the other. Do you think that, because those are all parts of a relationship and a life, but there's sometimes I see with people or even in myself, the logistics can get so much a part of the relationship, or the spicy side of things gets so much a part of the relationship. So how do you think, do you think it's possible to have both and balance the excitement with the logistical, just pragmatic side of being in a relationship?
Yeah, I think it is possible. I feel like I've got that now in my relationship. I will say we don't live together, and we sometimes don't live in the same city. And I haven't for myself tested it, what it would feel like to be more, to be sharing a household, to be parenting together. I'm sure I think it's hard. I think that's what people mean when they say marriage is hard. Maintaining a marriage is hard because it is much more challenging. I love this thing of not having to be together 24/7. I think that probably works for a lot of people. That's not the modern model of marriage, though, right? At least in this country, or probably most places. You don't get to have separate residences, but man, it'd be great. Yeah. I would like to think that I could do it all.
I haven't seen that in a prenup yet.
What, separate residences?
He's going to live in this home and she's going to live in that home.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. It probably. Well, I have one friend who, she and her husband each kept the apartments that they owned or that they rented before they got married. They happened to live in the same building, but they had separate apartments, and they've been married for 25 years. And she said it's the best thing. We probably wouldn't have stayed together if we didn't have. They don't, they will often stay in one apartment or the other, but they have their own separate units to go to. That's not a financial reality for most people,
right,
especially in New York, But if you can, I'd say, do it. It's great.
You heard it from Laurie.
Yeah.
Marriage advice: live separately.
Don't get married at all.
So on that subject, switching to divorce, you wrote about the divorce being what you described as your fault. And you said, I felt I deserved no financial reward for having destroyed my family. Do you see it that way? It's one person's fault?
Not entirely, but for the purposes of keeping things as easy as possible for our son, I felt that certainly it takes two people for a marriage to fall apart. I recognize that, and I'm not saying that my ex-husband was perfect, but he didn't do anything like what I did. He didn't do anything at all. He just wasn't my person. And instead of, I didn't really try very hard to fix anything or to get us to a place of understanding. The way that I chose to deal with my discomfort in the marriage was to go out and sleep with other people. So it's not great. He didn't do that. I did. I lied to him. And I think he was very surprised when he found out. And so that is tough. It's tough to own up to, I don't feel great about it. I feel like we've things are better now between us, but I really, really hurt him. That is the bottom line. I really hurt him. And so the idea of then going to court to fight over this apartment and, which would basically mean that my son would then, nobody would have the apartment because we didn't have a lot of money. So he would have to sell the apartment to give me half the money, and then they would have to go find some place to live. And it was already traumatic for our son to learn that we were separating. So I thought the least I could do is leave him, in this apartment. This is the only place he's ever known. It was against everyone's advice that I didn't, that I walked away, that we didn't split any assets. But it felt to me like the right thing to do, and I don't regret it.
You wrote about how Tony Bourdain had written you and said, it seems like a long, dark night, but it gets better. It really does. in the end, especially to people out there who are going through divorce? Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak to everyone's situation, but I think best case scenario, and hopefully for most people it does get better. I mean, the feelings, the acuteness of the feelings fades. That, you know, time heals all wounds. I'm sure it doesn't. I'm sure there are people who hate each other, you know, decades after a divorce. But you know, I was hopeful that Tony was right, and in my case, he was. And I think that if people want to get along for the sake of their children, or at least not tear each other apart for the sake of their children, that's a really powerful tool in everybody's toolbox.
Everyone, please listen to that. Replay that one. Go ahead.
So in an email to your ex, you wrote, "I may well not be the right person for anyone ever. I don't know." Do you still have those feelings?
No,
Yeah.
I don't. I really didn't. I really meant that when I said it. I really thought I might just be, you know, too broken. I might just be someone that needs to be alone. Not that I wanted that, but I just felt so completely at a loss when I was writing that. But I don't feel that way now. No, I've had two nice relationships since the end of my marriage, and a couple of nice flings. And it's I do feel like I found a person that is right for me. We're not soulmates, but we're right for each other.
So let's talk about Bourdain. How long were you his assistant?
I was his assistant for almost 9 years. I say almost a decade because it just is an easy round thing. But I started working for him in that capacity in 2009, and he died in 2018.
And is assistant even the right word? Like, I feel like you were much more than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an easy kind of shorthand. And that was definitely when I first started that job. It was, you know, just keep my schedule together, keep my calendar, do my, you know, talk to the people in the production office about my flights and my hotels so I don't have to do all that. And then as the time went on, there were more and more responsibilities.
What were they? Like, how would you describe, what would be the job description? What did you actually wind up doing?
I became kind of the stopgap between Tony and a lot of people who wanted something from him. And as time went on, that became more and more. You know, they wanted him to weigh in on, you know, would you like the JFK or the LaGuardia flight, and do you want the Four Seasons or the, you know, whatever, Mandarin. But there were just a lot. I mean, you can't imagine the weird stuff that people would ask of him or offer him.
Such as?
I think I mentioned it in the book. There's somebody had a very serious, very elaborate business deck about wanting to partner with him on a line of chicken feed. It's like, what? Okay. And, you know, maybe they just picked 100 celebrities and they thought, well, somebody's going to, you know, want this money. I don't remember how much money it was, but there was a young, like a teenage girl who had like extremely elaborate romantic fantasy about Tony that she was, you know, asking him to act out with her.
Like cyber stalking him. Like,
well, it was a physical letter. But
oh, it was
yes,
okay.
But yeah, I mean, to go be a guest at people's weddings or to officiate people's weddings, he got many, many of those requests. You know, will you read this book that I've written and give me notes on it?
And in that capacity, you're doing what? Writing letters back or emails saying no thanks?
Thank you. I mean, there were plenty of things where I knew that the answer would be no. And then sometimes there were things where I thought, probably no, but there's something about this that makes me want to share it with him. Not the, you know, come to our wedding or do the chicken. I mean, anything that had to do with business, money, even if it was absurd, I'd be like, I don't know, man, do you want to do this?
Yes.
Right.
And then there was also, sometimes he would have to write a, you know, forward for a book or a blurb or an essay or something, and he would send it to me to do a proofread or to, you know, to just make any notes on it, which is very flattering, I guess. Maybe flattering is not the right word, but I felt that there was a level of respect for me as a writer and editor, because he was such a great writer. then we wrote a cookbook together. So that was a whole separate thing. It was part of my job, but I also got, I got paid as a co-author, and that was, and then I was line editing books for the imprint that he had with Echo. So it was just lots of different projects. He was really very conscious of the fact that I wanted to write and I wanted to edit, and I was not just an assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would find projects for me or share projects with me that would keep me sort of on the hook.
How would you describe your relationship with him? Did it morph into a friendship?
Yeah, to an extent. There's such a massive power dynamic there.
Yeah.
Power imbalance, I should say. And so I considered him a friend. I think he considered me a friend. But there's always that thing of like, I'm the boss and you're my employee. And, it's not like any other kind of friendship that I've had, but it was a friendship. I'm very, very fond of him and, can't say enough good about him. Most of his close friends, if not all of his close friends, were colleagues or were people that worked on his crew or people he knew from publishing. And I think that's because having a 28-year career as a chef and cook, those are your friends. When you work in restaurants, your friends are your colleagues because you just don't have time for friends outside of the restaurant business. So I think it was a very natural thing when he got into television and publishing that those become your friends because they're your colleagues.
Did he ever talk to you about his time being a chef? Did he enjoy it?
It's hard to remember now. Did I read it in Kitchen Confidential or did we have a personal conversation? I don't know that we ever talked about it that much because I feel like that was his lore. That was kind of what was out in the world, was all of his stories about cooking and being a chef. So I think I knew it just from my reading.
The oral biography, you interviewed so many different people who weigh in on his personality, right? Kind, sharp, addictive. How would you describe it?
He was pretty much the same person if he was talking to Barack Obama or if he was talking to, a guy sweeping the floor at his apartment building. He didn't put on a different persona. He wasn't trying to impress people. He was so solid, in as much as he made a terrible decision that reflects, a person who was lost at the end of his life. I think he was actually so solid in who he was that he didn't have to sort of mask in different social or professional situations. I really admire that about him.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a little bit unnerving sometimes because he had a sort of performative patter. So he'd be talking to you and you're like, are you talking to me or is there a camera? Is there an audience? Like there was a kind of
charisma.
Yeah. And he was, contrary to I think what people expected of him and what I expected of him when I first met him, he was not brash and loud and, he was brash and loud and funny and irreverent on the page. And he could be that way if it was called for in a scene, but he was also kind of shy and kind of socially awkward, and you see that on film. And I think the charismatic kind of dick swinger that you see on television is as much a feat of sort of editing and angles and music and him truly having a good time as it is, who he was. But he sometimes struggled to make eye contact. He could be very socially awkward. And it was kind of endearing, that he made him very, very human.
Yeah. So after the tabloids reported his last girlfriend being spotted kissing a French journalist in Rome, you had this text exchange with him with Tony before his death. You wrote, "I hope you're doing okay." He wrote, "I'll live and will survive." Do you remember that moment and what you were thinking?
Yeah.
What were you thinking then?
I thought, okay, he's okay. He said, "I'll live." And so to me, that was like, don't fuss over me. It's going to be fine. Like, it sucks, but it's not the end of the world. And we'll survive. What I presumed he meant, and I think I wrote this in the book, is that it meant he and his girlfriend, their relationship would continue. That it was messy and uncomfortable, but that they would continue on as a couple.
You also wrote, he was apparently far more unwell than anyone had realized. How could we have not realized? Sitting here today, do you feel as though you're more equipped or in tune to recognize when someone is unwell? Do you think that's changed, or?
I would like to think so, but I don't really know. I haven't had occasion to test that theory. I think that all I can say is that, the noise in my head is a lot quieter, and that because I'm sober and because I'm older, I think I am more attuned to what's going on with people in a way that I think I was a little fuzzed out, for a long time. So maybe, I think I am more open to, I have more time and space to talk and listen to people, but I haven't been up against someone in crisis that I'm aware of, and I hope that that's not doesn't happen again. I felt in that moment the moment I was writing about, how could we not have known? That is a state of mind that I was in for a long time, and I think a lot of people that knew Tony were in for a long time. And at some point, you do move through, and you realize it's just not helpful to try and relitigate what happened and try and, blame yourself for missing this or that or not doing this or that. He was somebody, because of that power dynamic, in a way, he was in charge. And if he wanted people to back off and he didn't want to be fussed over and he wanted to be alone, there wasn't really a way in which you could override that. He was calling the shots.
Do you think that even though he was this very true, authentic person, as he moved through life, that there were parts of him that he was always hiding from people?
Probably. It's hard to say. I think that maybe that's true. That was true of Tony, and that's probably true of everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know. If you had asked me before he died if he had the capacity to actually end his life, I don't think I would have thought that. I don't think that was not something that I was aware. It just wasn't something that crossed my mind, which now seems like crazy, but it just didn't cross my mind because we were talking about what was going to happen the week after he got back from France. We were making appointments and reservations, and there were plans. There were things going on that he was talking about and seemed to be mildly looking forward to. I mean, I think we all have secret parts of ourselves.
I think that's probably true, that we all, carry secrets. And
yeah, I think that, doing the research for the oral biography, there were I learned something new about Tony from every single person that I talked to, and I thought I knew everything about this guy, and that was naive and probably arrogant of me to think that, but it really opened my eyes. And I'm sure there's plenty more. I mean, there've been other books and the documentary, and Tom Vitale, his director, wrote a book, and I learned things about Tony from that. I mean, we're all multitudinous.
You talk about everybody becoming a self-proclaimed therapist after he passed away. You wrote everybody was suddenly an expert on depression, addiction, burnout, jealousy, and Tony's romantic relationships. And I know you wrote about his decision to die of a broken heart, but do you think that was it, or do you think we're all just guessing?
I mean, we'll never know for sure. That is my best guess, that he was having a really hard time. In my own experience of having heartbreak, that it kind of, or grief, which I think maybe is somewhat the same thing, that it kind of comes, especially in the beginning, it kind of comes in these really strong waves, and you feel horrible and devastated and maybe have suicidal ideation, and then you have a little break and you feel okay, and then you're telling everybody, I'm okay, but then maybe you're alone and another horrible wave comes up. So I can only speculate. I'm not a mental health professional, but I have to believe that it was just a spasm of unbearable pain, grief, humiliation. And he didn't, I talk a lot about the toolbox. He didn't have any tools in his toolbox at that time. He couldn't survive the pain that I think was probably a temporary wave. He didn't ride it. He just took himself out.
Traveling that many days a year, did he ever share with you Was that exhausting, fun, sick of it?
I'm sure we had, we had conversations. Maybe he didn't say, boy, I'm sick of traveling, but it was like, just a level of exhaustion after we went to Manila, after we had been in Sri Lanka. I knew that he was quite burnt out. Sometimes it's hard to separate out like what I know now from what I knew then, because, watching the documentary, which I had a small part in helping to do some of the research on that, and talking to people for the book, I know now that he was quite exhausted and burned out. And I knew at the time that he was trying to figure out ways to travel less, to pull back from being the guy on camera, because these crews, they work really, really hard, but there's there might be 3 different sort of crews, and they, one group goes to Borneo, the other group stays back, and then they go to Houston. Tony's going on every shoot, and that is really exhausting. I don't think I realized until after how exhausting that is.
You mentioned Sri Lanka, and you talk about that in the book, a pretty harrowing experience for you. Can you describe what went down there and how it came to be?
Sure. So we were in Jaffna, which is in the northern part of the country, and we had there was an all-day shoot that was at a festival, and then Tony and I left the festival in the chauffeured car, and he, it was this really beautiful, brutal, sort of mind-blowing experience of being at this festival. And I'm watching it, and Tony's doesn't care. It's just like, I think he's just seen so much at this point that he's like not paying attention. And he just says, well, why don't you get some go get some KFC and some whiskey, and we'll get the crew, everybody will go hang out on the roof when they come back from the shoot. And I would go on these trips once a year. I would get to go on a location shoot. I didn't really have a role. I didn't have a role at all. I was just there to observe and to stay out of the way. And it was sometimes really, I felt a little bit uncomfortable. Like, what am I doing here? And I'm there, I'm in the way. And everyone's so nice to me, but I'm sure they're like, oh God, just another body to have to deal with, and another factor to be dealt with. So when Tony asked me to do something, it was like, great. I love having a task. And so I went to get KFC, which there was one around the corner from our hotel, and then I went to I found a liquor store, and I walked over to it. I had been warned by someone who lived there that any woman walking alone in the street, especially after dark, but really any time of day, in this very isolated, very religious part of the country, she's considered a prostitute. And I just didn't think that applied to me. I didn't think that the rules applied to me. And like, well, look what I'm wearing. Clearly I'm not a prostitute. So I walked from the KFC to the liquor store, and this man had followed me to the KFC, and then he was waiting for me on the street and followed me on the street as I was walking to the liquor store, and offered to show me his dick and asked me if I would go to a hotel with him. And either he thought I was a sex worker, or he was just trying his luck. I don't know. And he, spoke just enough English where he could, he knew the words to say. And I tried to shake him off, and he wouldn't leave me alone. And anyway, it became scary. And at some point, I left my credit card at the liquor store, so I had to go back, and I had to get these tuk-tuk guys to take me to the liquor store. And then my backpack was in the tuk-tuk, and the guy took off with my backpack and the tuk-tuk, and I was just like, oh my God, I'm gonna get raped, and I'm gonna lose my passport and my wallet and my phone and my keys and my glasses. Like, it was just a ridiculous couple of minutes of comedy of errors that did not feel funny at all to me in the moment. Ultimately, it all worked out. The tuk-tuk came back. I got back to the hotel safely. I got to the roof with the chicken and the whiskey for the guys. But it was really scary and really dumb of me to think I could just, not pay attention to what the rules and the norms were and walk around as a woman in a place that I didn't understand what the rules were. So that was Sri Lanka.
That's wild. Yeah, I've been to India and Ethiopia before and had not that experience, but it is so different. It's like you're on a different planet sometimes.
In terms of being
as
a
being
woman
a woman
and moving around.
Yeah. So what's next for you after writing this book?
I hope to go out and do some public speaking. I have a few gigs lined up, and I'm definitely hoping to do more. I really enjoy that, just getting out to kind of get some oxygen, meet people, listen to their questions, talk about my experiences. And I'm co-authoring a cookbook, kind of going back to my roots, with a New York chef, Ryan Bartlow, who has a restaurant called Ernesto's on the Lower East Side. So we've been hard at work on that. And I hope to continue somehow scratching out a living, writing books, and helping other people tell their stories. Because there's a lot of people with a lot of interesting stories, and they don't always have the capacity or time to write it themselves. And I've gotten pretty good at helping people tell their stories. So if anyone needs a co-writer, check me out.
So as we wrap up, anything that you would like to say to a partner, family member, friend that you haven't shared as of yet, but that you'd like to share now?
You want me to
Or something that's not in the book.
Personal news?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's a lot of hard truths in this book, so I'm not sure that there's much more I can say to people that hasn't already been said in the book. If my son somehow ends up reading it, I guess let's talk, but
Okay.
yeah, I don't think he'll read it, and he probably is not going to listen to this podcast.
Okay.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you, Laurie.
This was great.
Thank you.